Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Pragmatic Optimists. I am Rachel Cohen. I'm an attorney, and I'm joined by Rhode Island State Senator Tiara Mack. And we are here to talk about not just what's happening, but also what you can do about it and how we stay optimistic in an increasingly difficult time. And I think that our topic today is one that has perhaps pushed both of us towards pessimism at times over the last 2 years, Tiara, which is the ongoing genocide in Gaza. We're seeing a lot of kind of shifts in public opinion and public perception of what's happening in the Gaza Strip, in the West Bank, and occupied Palestine, particularly as we've seen ever more people killed as they're waiting in line for aid or similar. And I think that there's a lot to kind of unpack in that we want to make sure that we do in a quick and dirty kind of overview for those of you that may also be coming a little bit newer to this movement. Tiara and I have been here for a while, and I think that we're happy to welcome you is never exactly right, given that there's ongoing murder of civilians. But I think that I, for one, at least, am really, it gives me hope and optimism to see that we can continue to shift narratives and public perception of things that felt both very set and also just unbelievable that we were so set in our ways as a country in terms of supporting a bombing and relocation attempt of a captive civilian population a lot of the time. So we want to talk through just a couple of things that have finally come out in Western media over the last couple of days, and then what you can do about it.
Yes, thanks, Rachel, for really getting us started with this really pessimistic topic that we're in. And for those of you who have beat the news cycle and who have made it to the point of being in a space where it is not only not necessary, but is probably one of the most important conversations happening in our lifetime. And while we'll be talking about the ongoing genocide and manufactured starvation campaign in the Gaza Strip, it's also important to know that there is also a large-scale humanitarian crisis happening in Sudan, and that there is also a manufactured starvation campaign where 500,000 children have also died of starvation. And so while the global attention is really on Gaza, there are other humanitarian crises that are happening. And a lot of these manufactured crises are being fought and are being waged on civilians because of the resources that these regions bring to the global stage. And so we cannot remove any of these conversations from the Western world and their intentional intervention in these systems as either shadow actors in the current political climate, or 20, 30, 50, 70 years ago being implicated in the dismantling of community and safety and structure in these regions that have now led to some of the worst humanitarian crises that our generation has seen.
And I think, thank you so much for flagging that, Tiara, both because I think that we have a major responsibility to continue to shift attention onto manufactured starvation campaigns and proxy wars that are being fought in Sudan, and kind of extractive colonialism that's happening in Congo. And I think that the fact that I am still very much learning about those things, and that I know that they are not covered as much in Western media, even in the more progressive leftist Western media that I tend to consume and get my news from, I think that there's a big discussion right now happening about, these people who are coming to the movement for Gaza so late, and how did they not know in that moment? And I think that at no point do I ever wish to absolve anyone, including myself, for where they are imperfect activists and where they are not plugged in ways that they should be. But I think that the ongoing genocides in other parts of, even in, and I think that there is very much a racial element that's happening in these conversations around Sudan and Congo, where Black Africans are not treated with the same urgency when they are subject to mass death as people in other parts of the world. But even it also has just so much to do with geopolitics, because look at what's happening in Armenia and the ongoing Armenian genocide and the same kind of refusal to interact with that. And so I think that we all need to hold ourselves accountable to be better educated, to be plugged in, to be advocates, particularly with all of the privileges that come with our citizenship status and our ability to contact electeds that really have their fingers in every single geopolitical region and every single ongoing geopolitical atrocity. But I think that is what makes me say, okay, I am just so glad that if you've shifted in the last couple of weeks, I wish you'd gotten here earlier, but I'm so glad that you're here now, because there are so many things that I still need to educate myself on. And I think there's been a really concerted colonialist apparatus of media that has been hiding this discourse from people that do consider themselves well-informed. And I think that that's true. It often also makes me feel a little bit empathetic, even if, again, it's not excusable. We all have an obligation to educate ourselves, but it makes me feel a little bit empathetic for the people that are mainlining Fox News all the time and don't understand what's going on and the ways that the Trump administration is murdering people, frankly, because we just saw the exact same thing play out. I have on my TikTok started referring to the New York Times as Fox News for liberals.
Wow. That is, I mean, that's not inaccurate.
And I know you had some thoughts around like the New York Times coverage. I don't know if we want to touch on that before. We're going to close out this quick one with a couple of resources that we want to share with anyone who may be new to this movement and how to plug in.
Yeah, I mean, congratulations if you've made it this far by beating the algorithm in the news cycle, because I remember when I first, like the day of the first attack, I remember tweeting, I stand in solidarity with Palestinians, and I received death threats. And I was forced into silence on the second day of this conflict, this current conflict, not the history of 100 years in this region. But I remember shortly before reading the words of Angela Davis and other folks who have been speaking about this, especially in the Black community. Muhammad Ali, an athlete in the midst of the Vietnam War, also is speaking about this. Black Americans have been speaking about this for so long. And to have received death threats and forced into silence, I went to the DNC and I was lived out during the entire thing. But one thing I refused to not do was wear a keffiyeh, and there were uncommitted delegates. And it was really hard to break through that news cycle. And so for those of you who have made it to this point of being able to comfortably sit with the reality that we are watching a live stream through our telephones in a region, this ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing of a region, I'm so glad that you got here, because it is not unintentional that you were not supposed to get here in the way that you did. This news was kept from so many people. You had to actively seek it out. And there was a lot of shaming. There was a lot of charged rhetoric and weaponizing of language, specifically anti-Semitism, that was weaponized against so many communities who care deeply. And I'm so thankful for my Jewish friends and my friends in the Jewish Voices for Peace, who have really held my hand and allowed me to be able to have the language to interrogate how our communities and our societies normalize this level of suffering. And whether we're talking again about what is happening on the global stage, or even what's happening right in our own backyards, because as we continue to see the erosion of programs like SNAP, which keep families in our own country fed. And we're going to see more and more families, children go hungry in our own country. The richest current country in the history of the world will soon see more starving kids. We already have families that live off of one meal a day here, and some who can't afford to have a normal minimum wage job afford them the luxury of food. These are all connected, and they don't want you to connect these dots. Our news cycle doesn't facilitate the connection of these dots. So we're thankful that you've got here, and there is so much optimism in this moment. I'm going to just look at my phone real quick because I've seen a lot of things come through my algorithm, through my feed, and on my social media for the BDS movement, the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, which is a really effective tool. One of the important quotes that I saw while looking at this was from Desmond Tutu, and he said that the apartheid in South Africa would not have been possible without the peaceful protest and the peaceful action of boycotts and sanctions and divestment from companies that benefited from apartheid. And that is where an abundance of hope come from. I think we've also briefly touched on the 3% rule by Chenoweth, Erica Chenoweth, that states that the majority of peaceful protests have been the most effective tool for change, and it only requires 3% of the population. So if you are just now coming here, there are so many things that you can do that require very minimal changes to your everyday that will cause a huge impact. I have not been to a Starbucks since I've not been to Starbucks in like 2 years, and I used to be a teacher, get Starbucks gift cards all the time. And I don't know if that was your experience, Rachel, have not been to a fast food restaurant. And so what are you seeing and what's giving you hope in this moment as we have more people who have been welcomed into this fold of loudly and like voraciously condemning the human suffering that we're seeing?
I think what keeps me optimistic is always seeing that people have capacity for change. And that is something that I do think often, and I understand that it hits a certain way, also coming from someone who holds pretty much every privilege in the book, minus, the impacts of patriarchy in this country. And so I understand that it can feel a little bit Pollyanna, but what I come back to over and over again is this idea that if we don't believe in people's capacity for change, then what is the solution? Like, if I don't believe in that, then I end up an accelerationist, honestly, like somebody that's just praying for the collapse of everything so that everything falls and we can just totally start over. That's just not where I land. And I understand that some people do, and I respect that. But I think that I am constantly saying, people have capacity for change and growth. And I know that because I see it happen all the time. And I think that while it is frustrating to see a mass wave, and I think that politicians in particular who were silent on this, who had access to all of the information, those people I think do still deserve to be held accountable and criticized for coming so late. But at the same time, I think that, because I think that politicians changing their minds at this point, they're just sensing the wind is changing. But I think that the everyday people that are changing their minds in this moment are proof that there is really a lot of benefit that comes from speaking about things, from educating people about things, that if we give people access to information, they can change their minds and people understand that human suffering is wrong. And so I think that two kind of points that I want to make before I close the loop. And the first is that, number one, Tiara and I both were speaking about this early and often, and we had different experiences in terms of the type of vitriol that was leveraged against us. And I think that it is a powerful reminder always that the insulation of whiteness and of, I was going to say and of anything, but it's whiteness. If you are a white person and you are confused about how to speak on things, that doesn't mean that you don't speak on them, because you always are going to be more protected in terms of societal impacts and consequences. And also people are going to listen to you more. It's like, it's easier for you to speak, and it's more likely to have people in positions of power listen to you. And so if you don't know how to speak, your role as an advocate, as an ally, is to educate yourself on those things, to listen to people who are directly impacted, to amplify and uplift their voices, and to accept criticism as constructive when it is leveraged against you in terms of how you are saying things. And that's a skill. That's not something that people are just inherently good at. It always rankles a little bit to be criticized, especially when you are trying to do the right thing. But that is a part of your advocacy and activism, is to build that skill and get good at it. And so I think that segues into kind of the second point, which is, I think that what makes me really optimistic is that I think that this conversation is an entry point for a lot of people to connect the dots about colonialism broadly and American intervention in many, many countries throughout the world, and not just American intervention, because a lot of the proxy war that's being fought in Sudan is due to the United Arab Emirates, and that's an ally. But I think there's so many things that we need to educate ourselves on, that we really have a lot of power. If people stop vacationing in Dubai and people stop glamorizing Dubai, which even separately from the proxy war and the support of the RSF in Sudan is a city built on slave labor. But also, I have a lot of empathy for people that are not connecting those dots, because I went to Dubai 8 years ago when I was teaching and wanted to go somewhere glamorous. I say all of this not to absolve myself, nor to say oh, it's fine if you did it but because we're all educating ourselves constantly, and there's work to be done. And so I think specifically pointing people in this exact moment to two things, which is to call your electeds and tell them to stop supporting not just financial support to Israel, but financial support to countries that are in the process of committing war crimes. because that is not just Israel. And I think that it is fair when people point out that, you know, all of this focus is on Israel because they are committing ongoing atrocities, but we can broaden this and make it much more about colonialism and war crimes broadly. So I think that's thing number one. And thing number two is to investigate the boycott, divest, sanction movement, because that's a model for other situations, and it's a place to dip your toes in. There are always on the BDS website some immediate targets, and we can find that. We'll make sure that that's up. Thank you to our team that I'm sure has that up right now as I'm speaking, because it really, the root cause of so much of this, the root cause of the extractive harms in Congo is American and Western cultures of consumerism. And I too have not been to a Starbucks in a very long time. I no longer have an Amazon account, all of these things. It's very joyful. It's very joyful when you have to get out into the world, into small businesses. It makes you realize why a country that's veering like rapidly towards authoritarianism wants to divorce you from those little experiences of human interaction on the day-to-day. So I said we were going to go 10 to 12 minutes, and that was all me because I monologued at the end. So I apologize, but like, subscribe, follow Legal AF over at Midas Touch. Myself and Tiara have personal social media. It's been up on the screen. And stop buying stuff from people on the BDS list.
Stop buying it. You don't need it. Shop local.
All right. See you soon, Praggies.
Bye, Praggies.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.